Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will begin the webinar in 2 minutes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Helen Taguri, and I'm the Manager of Patient Programs at Crohn's and Colitis Canada. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to moderate tonight's webinar and to learn more from our guest speakers, Jennifer Haskett and Shira Gertsman. Tonight's education webinar, Eating Well with IBD, is hosted by Crohn's and Colitis Canada and is made possible through an educational grant from AbbVie. Please note, a link to the recording of tonight's webinar will be emailed to you for future viewing. So for those of you who are new to webinars, I'll quickly run through the logistics and show you how to ask questions. Right now, all of the participants are automatically muted so that everyone can hear the presentation and we can capture this webinar recording without audio interference. If at any time you would like to ask a question during the webinar, you can type it into the chat box. Simply look at the side of your screen and you should see a questions field. At any point throughout the webinar, enter your question there and we will make note of it. After our presentation from the two guest speakers, we'll have time for a Q&A session and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible before the end. This webinar runs for approximately 1 hour, so hopefully we'll get to about 10 to 15 minutes for question and answers. If at any time you're experiencing technical difficulties, you can also type this into the chat box and my colleague Sarah will follow up with you directly. And also please note, if you're having trouble hearing the speakers, it may be your computer's audio settings. So try calling in with the phone number that's being provided using a mobile or landline phone. Great, we're ready to get started. Just a little bit of background on Crohn's and Colitis Canada. Crohn's and Colitis Canada was established in 1974 by a group of concerned parents of children with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. We are a national charity with more than 65,000 supporters and 80 volunteer groups and chapters across the country. Our promise is to find a cure for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis and to improve the lives of children and adults affected by these diseases. We want the general public to be aware of these chronic diseases and the toll it takes on the nearly 250,000 Canadians living with Crohn's and colitis. Crohn's and Colitis Canada has funded over $150 million in research to date. That makes us one of the largest funders of Crohn's and colitis research in the world. Today's webinar is part of our youth education and patient education programs. Other patient education programs include our education webinar series, Ask the Expert Facebook Live events, and other educational resources that can be found on Crohn's and Colitis Canada's website. So as you can see on the slide, we listed some of our recent educational webinars. You'll also find community support on Find My Community, so you can connect with one of our local chapters. And we also have our online peer support program, Gutsy Peer Support, our Go Here Bathroom Access Advocacy Program, and as well the AbbVie IBD Scholarship Program. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jennifer Haskett, and our second speaker will be Shira Gertsman. Jennifer Haskett has worked as a clinical dietitian with the pediatric gastroenterology team at the IWK Health Centre in Halifax for 13 years. Among those with other GI-related diagnoses, Jennifer sees both inpatient and outpatients with inflammatory bowel disease. She feels proud to work with a team that participates in nutrition-based clinical research that offers nutrition therapy for the treatment of Crohn's disease and that has a strong nutrition focus. Jennifer has an interest in the benefit of nutrition therapy for the treatment of Crohn's disease and in supporting other health centers in initiating this as an option for their patients. She recognizes the benefit of youth with chronic illnesses connecting with each other and volunteers with Camp Guts and Glory, an overnight summer camp for children and youth with IBD. Shira Gertsman, our second speaker for this evening, is in the final year of her undergraduate degree in biomedical science at the University of Ottawa. For her honors thesis project, she is currently conducting a study on the research consent process for parents of patients in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, or CHEO. Shira was diagnosed with indeterminate colitis at the age of 14 and experienced severe flare-up and several complications throughout her high school and into the first few years of university. She was a recipient of the AbbVie IBD Scholarship in 2017 and serves as a mentor in the Gutsy Peer Support Program. She is now applying to medical school for entry in the fall of 2019, and we wish her the best of luck. So now to begin our presentation, Jennifer, it's over to you.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to present this webinar this evening. Welcome, everyone. Certainly, I'm sure, let's bring up my next slide here. There we go. Diet and nutrition with IBD, I think, is one of the most interesting, exciting, and controversial areas around providing care to patients with inflammatory bowel disease and speaking with the patients themselves, and in the case of a pediatric setting where I work, the families as well. Certainly, if you're wondering what can I eat, what shouldn't I eat, you are not alone. It is, as I say, one of the most popular questions for sure. And I just want to say, I think tonight for this talk, it's important to recognize that people are coming here with different experiences, different questions, different levels of knowledge around nutrition and IBD. And so I've tried to cover the basics and touch a little bit on some of the up and coming. And of course, because this is a youth education series, focusing a little bit of an emphasis on the population that might be heading into the university age or finishing up high school. So, all right. So, as many of you know, I believe, inflammatory bowel disease is a chronic and relapsing inflammatory condition affecting the gastrointestinal tract. So, impact on nutrition is unique to each individual person. So, currently, there is no cure for inflammatory bowel disease. Also, I will say this to start, there is no one diet. Truly, nutrition is very individualized for everyone with inflammatory bowel disease. So there's no easy answer for any of the nutrition questions, but certainly we recognize the role of diet is huge in all of this. Diet affects your lifestyle, your quality of life. It has an impact on of course, your clinical symptoms. I'm going to touch on that, and also the microbiome. And so for anyone who doesn't know what that refers to, it talks about essentially the environment of the bugs within our gut. And our bodies are actually made up more of bacterial cells than human cells. So there's a lot going on with that. Changes in the microbiome related to diet are a key area of research right now. So that's exciting and lots to talk about with that. And so certainly this talk could be hours or days long, but trying to touch a little bit on all of these aspects. So looking at the impact of inflammatory bowel disease on nutrition, and certainly recognizing the role of the gastrointestinal tract on digestion of food and absorption of nutrients. And so, of course, with ulcerative colitis, that refers to condition in which the large bowel or the colon is inflamed. And the colon's job primarily is to deal with fiber and fluid within our bodies. And so if there's inflammation in the colon, then it can't do its job very well. And so that often would lead to diarrhea. And so that's one example. And so with Crohn's disease, where you have inflammation anywhere from, we say in pediatrics, the gum to the bum, so the top of the gastrointestinal tract down to the bottom end. If you have inflammation at any part of that tract, then certainly your nutrition is affected. And you can see this is a bit of a busy diagram on the right here, but it gives you an indication of sort of where in the gastrointestinal tract different foods are and different nutrients are absorbed. And so you can see that depending on where your disease is located, your nutritional implications are going to be different. Certainly also age, severity of disease, location of disease, that all plays into what the nutrition concerns will be with your inflammatory bowel disease. So people with inflammatory bowel disease are certainly at risk for a number of nutrition complications. So weight loss, of course, being one. In children, growth impairment. We see that more so with Crohn's disease. And I've seen statistics really anywhere from about 30% to 80%, and even a little higher actually, in patients with Crohn's disease where their growth is impaired. Dehydration, people with IBD are at risk for that certainly, and nutritional deficiencies. And so the ones listed here, calcium, vitamin D, iron, folate, and B12, any of those deficiencies can occur for various reasons, but those are specifically some of the nutrients of concern when you have inflammatory bowel disease. And as an example, calcium and vitamin D malabsorption or deficiency can lead to a condition such as osteoporosis, and that's the weakening of bones. So malnutrition in IBD. Not surprising, as we've just seen, but it can be a result of reduced nutritional intake. So if you have poor intake, just poor intake of food because you have a poor appetite, if you have vomiting, abdominal pain, you just don't feel like eating. Also increased nutrient losses. So we saw in that last diagram there that certainly depending on what's happening with your inflammation, where it is, that if you're having a lot of blood loss, that can impact your iron levels, and certainly fluid losses. So you're at increased risk because of the increased losses. Surgery, certainly depending if you've had a resection of any kind or a colectomy at all, you've lost some portion of your gastrointestinal tract, so that's gonna cause potentially or increase your risk for malnutrition. Fistulas, infections, everything can contribute to malnutrition. Medications can change the way your body absorbs or uses nutrients, so it's important to be aware. One example of that is with steroid medications, that impacts the way your body uses and absorbs calcium and vitamin D, so that's important to be aware of and to work with your team on how you can counteract those concerns. Also, when you have inflammation or when your body has any sort of stress related to illness, typically you have increased nutritional requirements. So your body's working harder, so it needs more nutrition. And the challenging thing from that, of course, if you've already got increased nutrition losses and reduced intake, then the balance doesn't work out. You're not taking in enough already, but then you need more. So it's even harder to maintain good nutrition with inflammatory bowel disease. And of course, nutrition for everyone is important for overall health, for good energy, so you can keep up at school and with your friends and doing the things that you like to do. And so in anyone, nutrition is important, but with inflammatory bowel disease, you have to pay a little extra attention to it. And so the goals of nutrition interventions, primarily, so to correct and maintain nutritional status, to optimize growth and development in children and teens, to manage symptoms and functionality, so that's really impacting your quality of life, and to aid in the treatment of inflammation. And that's an exciting area for sure that I'm going to talk about a little bit more as we go on. So symptom management, I think these are a few things that in the time when you're having a flare, and this is different for everyone, I will say, you'll hear me say this a few times, that nutrition is very individual. What works for one person doesn't work for another. There's no handout that works for every patient. So a lot of this, as frustrating as it is for patients, is that, and families as well, is that a lot of it is trial and error. And so things like eating smaller amounts more frequently, okay? Avoiding known trigger foods. So as you live with this disease for longer, you can identify, some people can identify certain things that trigger their symptoms. Those may be things like spicy foods or one specific food. It's, as I say, it's different for everyone. What we suggest is including a protein with each meal or snack. So things like meat, poultry, fish, if you can tolerate them, beans, peas, and lentils, eggs, nuts and dairy. And again, during a flare-up, nuts you do want to be careful with, but certainly something like a smooth nut butter, such as almond butter or peanut butter, if it's smooth, can actually help to thicken stools up. But the protein source is going to help you maintain your nutrition. It's going to help you add calories, so that can be helpful. Choosing nutrient-dense foods, so you're getting more bang for each bite. If you're eating very little, you want to make sure that what you're eating really counts. Avoiding high-fat or greasy foods, so that if you have inflammation in your small bowels, sometimes can affect your fat absorption, and so that can contribute to symptoms and to diarrhea. Limiting spicy or highly seasoned foods can be helpful. Considering nutritional supplements, so the different nutritional drinks that you can get, that can be helpful in terms of topping up your intake to prevent further weight loss. And considering a low residue or low insoluble fiber diet for diarrhea is certainly something that we would recommend here. Insoluble fiber is the structural part of plants that is poorly digested in our body, and so it's not absorbed, and it comes out as part of your stool. And so if you think of things like often people think of it as roughage or the peels on fruits and vegetables, that sort of thing. And so what we suggest is backing off of that and following a low residue diet while you're having symptoms. And it may or may not be helpful. It's important to recognize that if you're having symptoms like diarrhea, that it's because you have inflammation going on. So it's always important to make sure you're working with your team to treat the problem, but trying these ideas or these different dietary approaches can help manage those symptoms so that they're not so bad. But it's important to recognize that a low residue or low fiber diet isn't incredibly nutritious. It's not advisable long term, and so what you want to do is gradually add food back in as your symptoms start to resolve and as you start doing better. Sorry. All right, so nutrition therapy. So this is talking about nutrition when we're targeting inflammation. So using nutrition to deal with inflammation. And this is probably a bit of a different talk than you would get from a dietitian that works in an adult setting. As you heard in the introduction, I work at a center where we offer enteral nutrition therapy for treating pediatric Crohn's disease. And I think that's really exciting. And as a dietitian, I'm incredibly biased that I think that's an amazing way to treat Crohn's disease when it works for people. And like any treatment, it doesn't, there's no one treatment guaranteed to work for every patient. But what this is, for anyone who doesn't know, is when you receive all or most of your calories from a liquid diet. So using a formula, like some of the ones that you might be familiar with, that like a nutritional drink, receiving all of your calories from that. And there's different durations here. We do up to 12 weeks during to induce remission, and that's without eating any other food. And so with that, patients can achieve remission. It promotes improved nutritional status. It helps with catch-up weight gain, optimizing growth potential, improves bone health, quality of life improves, and it's effective in promoting mucosal healing. And it is equally effective as medications in inducing remission. So that is really, in 2018, that is really the only nutrition therapy that has proven effectiveness in the treatment of Crohn's disease. And I will say, diet for managing ulcerative colitis is certainly not, there's not as much happening with that, certainly to my knowledge. But for managing Crohn's disease, this is one effective, proven nutrition approach. There are several experimental approaches, and many of you may be familiar with these. These are just a few of many: specific carbohydrate diet, FODMAP diet, the paleo diet, and the Crohn's disease exclusion diet. There's also the anti-inflammatory diet, the Mediterranean diet. There are a number of these. And so the challenge with this is that there are a lot of anecdotal or case reports, case series that demonstrate that patients have in fact experienced improvement on these. The challenge is that they are not adequately studied at this time. So just to briefly look at these, and so because they aren't scientifically proven to be effective, as healthcare professionals, it is a real challenge and a frustration for many patients in that we can't recommend these blanketly for individuals without the science behind it. I do believe that things are changing almost overnight. It's really incredible, but we're not there yet. So one, just briefly to touch on these, specific carbohydrate diet looks at specific types of carbohydrates. Those are chains of naturally occurring sugars that are poorly absorbed in the GI tract, and they result in the overgrowth of bacteria and yeast that then cause intestinal injury and impact further carbohydrate malabsorption. So it's quite restrictive, as you can see, and so adherence, so following the diet, is certainly a challenge for folks, but it really excludes a lot of complex sugars, starches, so corn, rice, flour, grains, legumes from the diet. It does allow simple sugars, so certain fruits, varieties of honey, homemade yogurt. The FODMAP diet, which that's a very short acronym for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And so those are fancy names for carbohydrates, which are naturally occurring sugars that occur in foods, and sugar alcohols. So when you see things on labels like mannitol, sorbitol, those ones that end in OL are sugar alcohols that, like these carbohydrates, are poorly absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract. And the theory, similar to the specific carbohydrate diet, is that they result in intestinal bacterial overgrowth and cause damage to the intestinal barrier and cause mucosal inflammation. Now, this diet was designed for the treatment of irritable, or use in patients with irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. And so for patients with IBS experiencing diarrhea or constipation, abdominal pain, cramping, gas, that sort of thing, that's where this is recommended and does have great evidence. And so in some cases with people with inflammatory bowel disease, they may find this helpful in terms of managing if you have sort of IBS type symptoms on top of inflammatory bowel disease. But it is restrictive and it is challenging to follow as well. The paleo diet, the theory behind that is that the human GI tract has not evolved over time as food processes and agricultural techniques have evolved. And so its focus is really on calorie balance and food sources more than eliminating specific foods. And so it includes non-domesticated meats, non-cereal plant-based foods, roots and legumes. And so really there is actually very little evidence for this diet currently for the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease. The Crohn's disease exclusion diet is another one. It comes out of Israel, and it's based on animal models that looked at different components of food that contribute to inflammation, that change the microbiome, that alter the mucus layer, increase intestinal permeability, or alter adherence or translocation of bacteria. And so this diet actually, there was recently a randomized controlled trial, and so that is considered a high quality research study. And it was a multi-center trial across Canada, and just actually we were part of that here at the IWK, which is exciting. And there are results coming out for that soon. So as with many of these, there is research being done. We're just not at a stage right now where we can recommend them for everyone. And it's certainly, there are some risks with experimental diets. So I put this little picture, I found it and I thought it was pretty appropriate. So unless you're using evidence-based practices, I can't hear words you're saying. And I'm sure as patients going to see health professionals, this is an incredibly frustrating thing for you in that we are not able to recommend these things. But I think it's important to understand why, in that there are risks for nutritional inadequacies, that there may be unnecessary restriction. But it's important to recognize, I think, that different from, say, 10 or 15 years ago, I think it's not that as health professionals, we necessarily believe that they're wrong or that they don't have something to them. It's just that we aren't there yet. So if you're interested in learning about these or trying them, I think it's beneficial to consider whether you can try them through a research study, working with a dietitian to make sure that you're being monitored appropriately, and doing it as adjunctive therapy, so with your medical therapy and not alone. And so be open about it. Talk to your team and they can help you. So the general recommendations that we make, and this, if you think about these things, there are common elements with some of the experimental diets. So avoiding trigger foods, you know your body best. So listen to your body and get to know what works for you. Choose whole foods more often and limited processed foods. So if you look at every one of those diets, they don't encourage processed foods. They don't include processed foods. And so that's across the board. So choosing, you'll hear a lot of dietitians talking about shopping on the outside of the grocery store. So approaching the bakery section cautiously, of course, but choosing, foods that are almost, thinking about how your grandparents and great-grandparents would have made just very simple, wholesome foods, limiting refined sugars and sweets, limiting red meat to 1 or 2 servings per week, including fiber sources. So that's something that people are afraid of often with inflammatory bowel disease. But unless you are in an active flare or unless you have a stricture, fiber is actually important for your bowel health and may be important to include more. Choosing fish more often, using healthier oils, olive oil and canola oils in cooking, being aware alcohol, caffeinated beverages can actually contribute to bowel symptoms, and drinking water, of course, is the best thing. And getting enough vitamin D. There's some new research that looks at vitamin D as being important for bone health, of course, but specifically in inflammatory bowel disease, and that individuals were actually shown to have a reduced risk of remission if they had an appropriate vitamin D level. So as with anything, using these general guidelines, or if you're following a specific diet and you want individualized treatment, speaking with a dietitian, a registered dietitian, can help make sure that you're not missing out on things. So I think that's really important and can be helpful. And so just focusing on the youth aspect of this, so staying healthy in school, that can be difficult, right? And so one thing I think to think about is doing some work ahead of time. If you're looking, this is a little bit focused to students living in a dorm environment, but looking ahead to see whether your school or dorm has looking at what they have for a meal program, whether they have a dietitian with their food service program that may be able to help ensure that you can get your special needs met if you have any, considering whether you can have some things like a fridge, toaster oven, even a small blender in your dorm so you can have access to make your own food. So making things like smoothies that can offer, quick, healthy options. And just, again, having healthy stuff on hand so you can avoid the packaged processed stuff as much as possible. Buying things in season, so produce can help you save money, because eating this way can be a little bit expensive. And accessing student health services, working with your healthcare team, because sometimes they can help you in terms of accessing nutritional supplements if you're on any of those, getting some coupons or some samples that may help if your budget's tight when you're in school paying for textbooks. And just make sure you know where to get help and seek out those supports before you need it. And so on that note, I will turn it over to Shira, who is the expert in managing diet and nutrition in school.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Just got to get control over the PowerPoint here. Okay, so yeah, I am definitely not a medical expert or a nutrition expert at all, but I am an expert on having IBD and going to university while having IBD. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And hopefully for any students who are listening, I'll be able to give you a bit of useful information. So when you have IBD, just deciding to go to university can be a pretty big deal. I know when I was in high school, I spent probably more time in the hospital and at doctor's offices than I did actually in class. And the only reason that I was actually able to graduate was because I had this super great guidance counselor who set me up with some online courses and other things to help me get the credits that I needed to graduate. So when I was looking at going to university, I was pretty nervous that there wouldn't be anyone there to sort of hold my hand and help me in that way. And there definitely isn't anyone who's going to reach out to you and make sure that you're okay. But I have found that if you take the initiative to actually seek out those resources yourself, university actually has even more resources available for you. You just have to take that first step. So for anyone who's in the process of applying to universities, the first thing that I recommend is contacting the accommodations offices to make appointments with them. You can do this during the application process or once you've already picked a school. But it's really important to do this before classes start because you want those accommodations set up for the first day of class when you're writing your first exam, and it can take a bit of time to get that documentation all settled. So some accommodations you might want to consider are accommodations for when you're writing exams. For example, if you're someone who needs to use the washroom frequently, you don't want to lose all that time in your exam every time that you have to run to the bathroom. So they can set it up so that they can pause your exam time while you do that. If you have mandatory classes that might be required for participation marks, or some classes, if you miss class, you actually fail the course. So if you miss class due to illness or due to appointments with specialists, they can set up an accommodation so that You don't get penalized for that. And if you're interested in living in residence, then you can actually apply to get priority for living on campus in a private apartment with a private bathroom, if that's something that you'd feel more comfortable with. A really important accommodation for me during my degree was taking part-time classes. So for me, this meant taking 3 courses per term instead of 4 or 5. And I did this for the first couple of years of my degree while I was dealing with some flare-ups. And any student in university has the right to take part-time classes, but you do lose out on a lot of the benefits of being a full-time student, like scholarships, insurance, bus pass, various resources. So if you do this with a medical recommendation from your doctor to take a reduced course load, you can actually get all the benefits of a full-time student while only taking part-time classes. And even if those perks don't really matter to you, I would still highly recommend getting that documentation in right away when it's happening, because you never know how it might help you out later. For example, right now, when I'm applying to schools, they look at my transcript and they see that I took part-time. And if I don't have a documented reason that I did that, they could penalize me for that and not weigh my application as heavily. But because I have that documentation, they can't penalize me, and it's a lot harder retroactively to go back and try to prove that you were sick. So just get that documentation in when it happens. And finally, even once you've set up your accommodations with the accommodations office, make sure that you talk to your professors at the beginning of every term. You can contact them by email if you're not comfortable talking to them in person, but the accommodations office will tell you that they're going to reach out to your professors. But in my experience, the professors, they're usually sent an email and they don't really open it. So if you reach out to them and let them know, they'll really appreciate that. And they'll be a lot more receptive if you miss an assignment or an exam, if you have told them in advance that that might happen. Coming to them after the fact, they're going to be less receptive about that. So in addition to formal university supports, getting peer support is super important. Some universities actually have specific clubs for Crohn's and colitis. At the bottom of the slide, there's the Queen's University Crohn's and Colitis Committee, and that can be really great to connect with other students who are going through the same issues that you're experiencing. But for me, there was nothing like that at my university. So I just found it really helpful to just reach out to other friends and tell them what I was experiencing. And people were super supportive and understanding and curious about it. And something that was really useful was when I attended orientation week. I met a lot of students who lived in residence, and I didn't live in residence. So they actually would allow me to crash at their place in the middle of the day between my classes if I was exhausted. So friends are always good to be there to help you out. And if you're feeling awkward about, telling your friends about your IBD, worried about some embarrassment there or any sort of stigma, a really great way to do it is to just invite them to the Gutsy Walk. You can make a day out of it. It's fun for everyone. It'll introduce them to what IBD is without having any sort of awkwardness there. So over the past 8 years, I have definitely tried a lot of diets. Some were recommended by my physicians, some I found online or from friends. Jennifer did touch on a lot of these in her talk, so I'm not going to go into the details of them, but mainly I do want to emphasize that there are so many different options. And so if one thing is not working for you, then try something else. There's always other options. And another important thing is that you don't have to fit into any diet box. You don't have to follow a specific diet with a specific name and a specific set of rules. You can just use these diets to sort of set a guideline for your own experimentation process to design a diet that fits you personally. So for me, through diet, my goal is not to cure my IBD because, as Jennifer said, there's a few treatments that they're starting to find some evidence for through nutrition, but not very much yet. And the goal is mainly symptom management. So for me, a big thing when I'm having a flare-up is nausea. And I often find that the meds that I take for my flare-ups actually make the nausea worse. And we all know how important it is to maintain weight during a flare-up and how hard that can be when you're super nauseous and you don't feel like eating. So for a while, I sort of tackled this the typical way, which was drinking a lot of Ensure drinks. I would drink, 3 Ensure plus calories every day, in addition to my meals and snacks. And interestingly, I didn't actually gain any weight when I was doing that. They made my stomach feel a lot worse psychologically. I really didn't like having to drink them all the time, and you can imagine how exhausting that taste gets when you're drinking them so often. So eventually I decided to try something different, and I discovered these cookbooks by Danielle Walker. She has ulcerative colitis, and she's made these really great cookbooks that fit all sorts of different diets that you may be trying. And the big thing that I love about her cookbooks is that they're really about eating what you actually enjoy eating and finding a way to make that work in a way that also doesn't flare up your IBD or reduces your symptoms, but making sure you're still enjoying the food that you're eating. So I sort of focused on making foods that were more natural, but super high calorie, high nutrient density. For example, on this page, there's a picture of granola made with almonds and raisins and honey instead of refined sugars, or a coconut milk avocado smoothie, or puddings or things with peanut butter that were all, free of refined sugars, high nutrient density, and my body reacted much better to those. The nausea for me was a lot reduced. I actually had an appetite again and was interested in foods that I was eating, and I was able to put on that weight that I hadn't been able to put on for almost 4 years since I was diagnosed. And I really do want to put a disclaimer here that I'm not bashing Ensures, and I'm not endorsing, the paleo diet essentially, which is what I was doing, or the SCD diet. That's just what worked for my body. The main thing that I want to get across is that if you're trying something because that's the typical thing that people do for that symptom and it's not working for you, don't keep doing it. Try something different, because maybe there's something else that would work better for your body. So I did follow the SCD and paleo diets pretty much to a T at the end of high school, and I was doing really well on those. But university does have some barriers to eating well and staying on strict diets like that. If you are looking at living on campus in first year, you will probably encounter the dreaded mandatory meal plan. And that basically means that you have to pay upfront for all of your meals for the entire year and then redeem all those meals at campus food services. So if you're going to be doing something like this, then it's super important that you see what food options the university has before you commit to a university and put that money down. Some universities have pretty much only fast food options, and like Quiznos is great, but you don't want to be eating it 3 meals a day every day for 10 months, especially if you have a bowel disease. Other schools have a lot more variety, have dietitians, they can accommodate you at food services. So mandatory meal plans can definitely work, but not at all schools. So make sure that it's something you look into before choosing a school. Even if you're not living on campus, I think a big thing that every single student in university deals with, especially in first year, is the issue of time management and trying to maintain their nutrition, but also, trying to get foods that are convenient. And, you've probably heard of the freshman 15, and this is because most students are going to sacrifice their nutrition in first year to save that time. And I think that the issue of time management is even harder when you have a chronic illness like IBD, because extra time is spent towards going to doctor's appointments, and you may have lower energy and you're dealing with your symptoms and side effects of medications. So it can be really hard to want to take any of that time and energy and devote it to eating well. And I can definitely say that I succumbed to that in my first year, and I stopped eating super well and stopped, following those diets that had been working for me. Was eating whatever my friends were eating, and I went into a pretty bad flare. And in hindsight, I can say that the amount of time and energy that I spent trying to deal with that flare up just massively eclipsed the amount of time and energy it would have taken to eat well in the first place. So lesson there, not worth it to do that. Don't sacrifice your health for convenience. And I think the best way to get around the time management issue is just to focus on planning ahead and getting in a routine. Because once you're in a routine of how you shop, how you eat, how you cook, where you find food, then it really doesn't take any additional time and energy to follow that plan. For example, I know I'm going to be on campus for this many hours this day. That means I have to bring this much food, and this is what I typically bring, or where I can find food. And then finally, I just want to touch on the importance of peer relationships. This again is super important for every single student in university, having a good support system. And there are a lot of barriers to that too in university. Again, the issue of having time, dealing with all your classes, the stress of exams, it can be really hard to maintain a social life with that. And that's a lot harder when you're someone dealing with a chronic illness. You know, for some reason, every social event in a university seems to start at 12 a.m. And when you have a chronic illness and your body is trying to heal and you're in a flare up and you're trying to keep up with class, it can be really hard to go to those. And sometimes you do definitely need to put your health first and rest. And I've definitely felt like the dog in this picture so many times during university where I've had to stay home and put my health first and wished that I could participate with my friends. And I'm not going to deny the reality that that definitely happens. And I'm not going to deny that it kind of stinks. But I do want to emphasize that nutritional limitations should never, ever be a reason not to participate in a social activity that you would otherwise want to participate in. You know, there are enough other barriers there that nutrition doesn't need to be one of them. With my friends, pretty much every social activity revolves around either alcohol or fast food or dessert, like ice cream, for example. Everyone seems to love to go out for ice cream. And none of those foods go well with my gut, and it's not worth it for me to make myself feel unwell by eating them. But I can still go to all these activities. For example, if they're going to a restaurant and I can't eat anything on the menu, I either bring my own food or I order something off the menu. I request something different. And everybody's always like, what? You can do that? You can order something that's not on the menu? I didn't believe it either until I tried it, but you totally can. Restaurants are super willing to accommodate that kind of thing. And if you're worried about what your friends are going to think, seeing you do that, just be honest with them. People are just going to appreciate that you made the effort to come. So in summary, don't be ashamed of having IBD and do be honest about it. I think that, you know, one of the biggest reasons that people choose not to be honest about having IBD is that they're embarrassed about it or they're worried about being judged. And I think that a lot more judgment comes when you're not honest about it. For example, a lot of activities my friends invite me to at night, I have to say no because I know that I need my rest. And if I didn't tell them that I had a medical condition that made me a lot more exhausted, they would probably just think that I didn't like them and they would stop inviting me to things because I say no. But because they understand, you know, they don't judge me for that, and then they can invite me to other things during the day. Don't be afraid to ask for help, but also don't wait until you're in a crisis to try to set up your support systems. Be proactive about it. Set it up in advance when you're well, before you enter a flare-up. University goes super fast, and if you wait until you're 3 weeks behind on your classes and in a really bad flare, it's going to be super hard, if not impossible, to catch up with that. Don't, or at least try not to, compare yourself to your peers. This is definitely easier said than done, and I'm super guilty of it. But I think the best way to get around it is to just make your peers a really positive part in your life, use them as a support, and the best way to do this is just to participate in social activities as much as you can. As I said before, don't sacrifice health for convenience. It's totally not worth it. And the best way to get around that is getting into a routine of planning ahead. And finally, don't follow nutritional dogma if it doesn't work for you, but rather, you know, experiment with your diet to reach your personal goals for symptom management. And I did touch a bit upon my experience taking Ensure, but I think another important thing to mention is what goes on sometimes in online peer support groups. Those groups are great. I use them. I love them. But I think sometimes what happens is a person will try a certain diet and it will work for them, and then they'll want to help everyone else. So they'll post about, you know, implying that it's the cure for IBD. And as someone whose IBD is not cured, it can be really tempting to read that and think, okay, if I just do what they did, then I'll feel better. And as Jennifer said, there's not a lot of scientific evidence backing this up, and it's super individual. And if you see a post like that and you haven't tried that and it's not going to put you at risk for any sort of nutritional deficiencies, then go ahead, try it. But listen to your body, and if it's not working for you, then try something else, because just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. All right, and I'll hand that back off to Helen for the question and answer period.
Great. Thank you so much, Shira and Jennifer. That was really, really interesting presentations. So much great information. So really appreciate it. So now we'll begin the Q&A. We've had quite a few questions come through, both live and ahead of time. So hopefully we can get to everyone's questions. Jennifer, question for you. You talked a little bit about supplements, and we had a couple of questions around supplements. One question was, how can an individual find out if they have any specific nutritional deficiencies? Are there any tests that they can take to find that out?
That's a great question. I think generally speaking, and this is very much a dietitian line, but I think meeting with a dietitian to look at your diet in detail is the first step. Generally speaking, what we do is sort of screen your diet and look for patterns and things that might be lacking. We might be able to make recommendations of ways to top up in specific areas where you're potentially lacking. Generally speaking, your healthcare team, your physician, when they order your blood work, they're generally looking at those key areas of concern to monitor you for nutritional deficiencies. Checking for micronutrient levels, some of the vitamins and minerals, some of those tests aren't, and no blood test is perfect, so they can be difficult to interpret. The other challenge is they can take a really long time to get results back, and by the time you've got a result back, chances are you may have changed what you were eating. So they're not perfect. So I think generally speaking, if you're concerned about nutritional deficiencies, I would suggest meeting with a dietitian. And as much as people hate doing them, and as much as I hate asking for them, detailed food records can be very helpful to look at. You know, what are you actually taking in on average over the course of, say, a week or so? And then you can actually, many dietitians can put it through a computer program that'll analyze it for adequacy.
Well, that's great. I'm actually glad that you brought up the issue of food journaling. Do you have, or even this is for Shira, do you have any apps or particular ways that you recommend for people to kind of do their food journaling, or just old-fashioned pen and book?
Speaking as a pediatric dietitian, the best way that seems to get that to happen is get your mom to do it. But I would say, but it's difficult, right? So there are a number of different apps. I don't have one specifically. If you Google Symptom diary, there, and I think I've seen some specifically for Crohn's and colitis. So you can Google that. There are apps, as you said, where you can enter it in. Another thing I'll suggest sometimes, especially for kids like in high school, is taking pictures of what they're eating. So at the end of the day, they can write that down, because sometimes in the moment you might forget to write it down, and then over the course of the day, forget what you had to eat. So
that's a great suggestion. Shira, is there anything that you do to track your food intake, or during flares, or at other times?
Not for a while. I definitely, when I was more new to being diagnosed and I was at the Children's Hospital, I did do some food diaries, and I actually just took an Excel spreadsheet and wrote in everything that I did because the dietitian there calculated it. I do know that a lot of my friends, and this isn't for Crohn's and colitis, but this is for dieting, they use apps for that, and I've seen them. I don't know the names, but I know that you could definitely use them for nutrient tracking as well. Even if you're not dieting to lose weight, you don't have to use them for that, even though that's what they may be marketed as. And they can be super useful where if it's a purchased food, you can just write in, you know, the name and how much you ate. But if you make food from scratch, you can just enter in all the ingredients. You know, if it's muffins, you put in all the ingredients, how many you made total, and then how many muffins you ate, and it works pretty well.
Okay, great. We had a question around probiotics. Actually, we had a couple of people ask about pro and prebiotics. Are there any that you recommend, or any studies that you're aware of in terms of benefits?
Also an excellent and moderately controversial topic. Typically, I have to say with the pro and prebiotics, To my knowledge, there's no evidence for probiotics in inflammatory bowel disease in general. In some specific circumstances, there may be cases where they're appropriate. I generally suggest you speak with your doctor about it, with your gastroenterologist specifically about that. I think a common thing, generally people blanketly think probiotics are safe and helpful, but in some cases, they may not be safe and they may not be appropriate. Also, they're generally, in the cases where they have been shown to be effective, they're only effective in certain doses. And sometimes, and in many cases, people, when they're taking them, aren't taking doses that would be considered effective. Probiotics, there are a number of different strains of probiotics, so different types of bugs, basically, or bacteria. And so when they're studied, generally there's a certain bacteria that would be used in a certain situation. And so there are millions of different examples or circumstances how that might work. And so it's more complex than I think most people realize. So generally, I suggest speaking with your gastroenterologist about that. The prebiotic piece is a little bit different in that prebiotics are similar to those poorly absorbed carbohydrates that you heard about in a lot of those popular diets. And so when they go through your intestinal tract and get to your colon essentially undigested, and so they're food for bacteria. But in some cases, the prebiotics, so things like inulin, fructooligosaccharides, we see those. They can cause some cramping, some diarrhea, some belly pain, some gas. So if you're using prebiotics, you might want to just, again, maybe journal how you're tolerating those and see if it's actually helpful. So that's the short answer.
Great, thank you. I have a question for both of you, or either of you. We have a number of parents who've joined us this evening who have teenagers with Crohn's or colitis, and they're really struggling with how to get their teenager to eat healthy, given that they have IBD. Do you have any suggestions? Shira, as a teenager yourself, I don't know how you waged.
Definitely near to the beginning of my diagnosis, there were definitely some fights with me and my parents. But a lot of those fights, I think, revolved around drinking the Ensures that I really didn't want to drink. So I think it, for me, came down to finding a way to meet those needs with foods that I actually enjoyed eating somewhat. And, that may not work for everybody depending on the severity of the disease and the nutritional circumstances. But I think being creative and open towards the foods that they like, and there are a lot of different options, a lot more than I realized at first, about how to cook differently and how to cook in nutritious ways and still make the food taste good. That can be a lot more motivating, because I know if you hate the food that you're eating and your stomach doesn't feel well in the first place, during my first flare, I think for 2 months, pretty much all I ate was Lay's potato chips, because that was the only thing that settled well with my stomach that I knew of before I discovered all these other diets. So I think just playing around and seeing if there's something that they actually enjoy the taste of.
Okay. And Jennifer, what about you working with parents?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just be patient, for sure. It's not unique to teens with IBD, absolutely not. But I think don't push it. For one thing, if they're not feeling well, it's not going to go well, and you're just going to create more problems. Don't make meal times a fight. One thing that can sometimes help is, I think, starting with very small portions. So often, I think, as adults, when we try to get our kids to eat new things or different things, we put a spoonful, what we think is a reasonable portion, on their plate. But for anyone trying something new that they've never eaten in the past, that can be overwhelming. And so setting them up for success where literally, if it's peas that they don't like, then put 1 pea on their plate. And that the deal is that, maybe they have 1 pea and that's it. And then that's a win for both of you. Your child's tried something different, but that you're setting up for a successful scenario, and then you can increase that over time. We find that that's more reasonable than, if they've never eaten it, they're not going to eat a bowl full of peas. So that can be helpful. Also, getting teenagers especially involved in shopping and cooking is great as a life skill, but also maybe once a week you decide that you and your teenager are going to go shopping together and make a new recipe. So that's a great way to incorporate some of Shira's great points about trying to find new foods that you like and that you really enjoy. So trying some new things together can be helpful, but don't push it.
And can I touch on a point that Jennifer just made? If there's some foods, if you're concerned about them eating unhealthy, but there's certain foods they don't want to give up, a lot of my favorite foods, like I'm a chocolate addict and there's so many, and I love dessert. And definitely, giving that up would be really hard, but there's a lot of really nutritious ways to make, different versions of foods that can be just as good. So you don't have to deprive completely when you're eating healthy of all the foods that you like.
It's a great point.
A really great point. Thank you so much. We're running short on time. We do have a few more questions we'll try to get to if you're happy to stay on for a little bit longer. We had a question from someone about lactose. And I know this isn't something that was talked about. Do either of you have any experience with lactose in IBD?
Certainly, I would say that some people find that they don't do well with lactose. Again, it depends on where your disease activity is, because of where lactose is digested. But typically, there are a lot of lactose-free products out there. Also, sometimes people that might have difficulty with lactose, firm or hard cheeses and yogurts can be better tolerated. So you might find that you can't drink fluid milk, but if you still enjoy those things, then doing some yogurts or hard cheeses. Also, there are like lactate pills that you can take that basically give your body the enzyme to digest the lactose before you consume it. But I would say trying small amounts might be a reasonable thing to do when you're not in a flare. But there are many people that find that they don't tolerate lactose as well.
Great, thank you. So we had a couple of individuals ask about how do they access a dietitian or a nutritionist. What's the best way to go about that after whether you're newly diagnosed or you're currently in a flare?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the first place to go would be your healthcare team, so your gastroenterologist, because they may be able to direct you someone who specifically works with people with inflammatory bowel disease, which is going to be most helpful to you. But also on the Dietitians of Canada website, I believe it's www.dietitians.ca, but I can check that and send Helen a link. And there is a link for Find a Dietitian, so you can find a registered dietitian in your area. There are registered dietitians or professional dietitians are regulated, and so you want to make sure that you're seeing someone who is who's registered in that area. But Dietitians of Canada, your healthcare team, and you should be able to find someone there.
That's a great resource, Jennifer. I actually recommend that a lot to patients that call in. If you just do a Google search, find a dietitian,
yes,
you'll find a link. And you can actually put in as a keyword Crohn's or colitis, and then enter your postal code, and you can find someone near you who maybe not specializes, but at least has some experience with IBD.
Exactly. And if they don't, they would be able to, they're qualified and would be able to help you get the information you need. One point on that as well, if I can add, a lot of insurance companies will cover dietitian visits. So it's important they may need to be you might need to check with your insurance company first on the details around who you can go to, but that's something to consider for sure, because that could be helpful.
Great, thank you. So my last question is for you, Shira.
Okay.
What would you tell your 14-year-old self as it relates to diet nutrition?
Wow. Okay. I would tell my 14-year-old self a lot of things, but I think in terms of my nutrition and honestly in terms of a lot of things surrounding my IBD, I think the biggest mistake I made was not speaking up for myself and how I felt. And especially as a teenager, a lot of teenagers when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, you still have to go to the children's hospital, but mentally you're not really a child anymore. And I think I definitely would have benefited from sticking up for myself a bit more in my symptoms so that they weren't missed. And when my treatment wasn't working or I wasn't feeling good with my diet, that I addressed that earlier. Because when a doctor recommends something, sometimes it's hard to say that it's not working because you think that it should be working. But I think that that's really important with diet. If you're not feeling well still on it, you need to emphasize that you need something different.
Great. Thank you so much, Shira. Okay, well, I'm going to end the question and answer session now because we are running over time. So thank you both, Jennifer and Shira. This was truly a very informative webinar this evening. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that we did record tonight's session, so we'll be sending you a link to the recording. We'll also be sending you a feedback survey. We'd like to hear from you, hear about your experience with this webinar and what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. So please make sure you fill out the survey. And stay tuned for upcoming education events in 2008, 2019. We've got some great events, online education events coming up. So for more information, you can check out our website or follow us on social media at Get Gutsy. Finally, we'd like to invite you to make more discoveries and breakthroughs possible. Now in its 24th year, Gutsy Walk has raised over $38 million for research, advocacy, and patient programs, and we'd like you to be a part of it. With your support, cures for IBD are just steps away. Register now at gutsywalk.ca and join us on Sunday, June 2nd at a location near you. Thank you everyone for joining us and for your thoughtful questions. I especially want to thank again our speakers, Jennifer and Shira, for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their experience and expertise with us. If you have any questions that weren't answered, please do not hesitate to write to us at learn@crohnsandcolitis.ca and we'll be happy to follow up with you directly. And this concludes tonight's webinar. Thank you again for your participation and have a good evening.